Hey everyone, welcome in, ready to deep dive.
Always.
All right, so today we're looking at climate change in Bangladesh.
Okay.
But, and here's the twist, we're not looking at like the usual news stories or reports.
Right.
We're going right to the source.
Interesting.
University exam questions
Huh. Okay.
from Bangladesh,
Wow.
spanning several years actually.
So what kind of questions are we talking about here?
Well, they cover a lot of ground.
Okay.
Like the causes of climate change, the effects it's having on Bangladesh,
Mhm.
and the strategies being developed to address it.
Wow. So it's like we're getting a glimpse into the future.
Exactly. Like, how is Bangladesh preparing to face this global challenge?
Yeah, that's a really cool perspective.
And trust me, what we found is pretty surprising.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
We're talking about things like the Sundarbans.
The what?
The Sundarbans, that incredible mangrove forest,
Oh, right.
the
Yeah.
ozone layer,
Okay.
and even
What else?
pandemics.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about the environment then.
No,
Yeah.
not at all.
Yeah.
It's about economics, public health, international relations.
It really shows how interconnected everything is, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit.
Okay.
One question that comes up again and again in these exams is, what is climate change?
Okay, so that seems pretty basic.
Right, it does.
Yeah.
But I think it's crucial to have a shared understanding,
Right.
you know?
Oh, absolutely. And you'd be surprised how many people actually confuse climate with weather.
Right.
Yeah,
Huge difference.
totally. I mean, weather, that's what's happening outside right now,
Yeah.
rain, the sunshine, the wind.
Yeah.
Climate is the long-term average
Right.
weather patterns over a long period of time.
Okay, so climate change
Mm-hmm.
is about those big picture shifts,
Right.
not just a heat wave here
Yeah.
or a rainy season there.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's what climate change is.
Yeah.
But why should you, listening to this,
Yeah.
care about climate change in Bangladesh,
Right. Good question.
especially if you don't live there?
Yeah, why should they care?
Well, think of it this way. Climate change doesn't respect borders.
That's true.
Whatever happens in Bangladesh can and will impact the rest of the world.
Okay, I see.
One exam question that really jumped out at me
Yeah, what was it?
was from an economics paper,
Okay.
and it asked students to calculate the potential cost of climate-induced migration from Bangladesh.
Wow. Okay, so they're getting really specific.
Yeah, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, Bangladesh is so incredibly vulnerable to rising sea levels.
Right.
I mean, they have a very dense population
Yeah.
living in low-lying coastal regions.
Right.
So even a small rise in sea level could displace millions.
Millions.
Yeah, leading to mass migration
Wow.
and potentially even conflicts over resources in neighboring countries
Yeah.
that have global economic and political ramifications.
It's a domino effect.
It really is.
Wow.
So that's how the global connection is made.
Yeah. No, that's a really clear example.
Yeah, so we talked about the global picture,
Mm-hmm.
but let's zoom in on Bangladesh itself.
Okay.
What does climate change actually look like there?
Right.
Well, the exam questions really highlight the concerns about the coastal areas,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the Sundarbans.
Right. Yeah, the Sundarbans.
Now, for anyone who doesn't know,
Yeah.
that's a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Oh, wow.
It's the largest mangrove forest in the world.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah, and it acts as a natural barrier
Okay.
against cyclones and storm surges.
Oh, that's so important.
It is, but one exam question I saw
Yeah.
asked students to analyze how rising sea levels and increasing salinity are actually harming the mangroves.
Oh, so climate change is weakening that natural defense system,
Exactly.
making the coast even more vulnerable.
Yeah,
Wow.
and that also has ripple effects on biodiversity too.
Right. Of course.
Like the Sundarbans are home to the Bengal tiger, for example.
No way. The Bengal tiger. Wow. That's an image that'll stick with you.
It really does.
Yeah.
But it's not just the environment that's affected.
Right.
These exam questions also dig into the effects on human health.
I mean, that's not surprising.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
And it's not just the obvious things,
Like what?
like heat stroke and dehydration.
Right. Right.
There's one question that really stood out to me
Okay.
that asks students to discuss the link between climate change
Yeah.
and the increased risk of pandemics.
Pandemics. Hold on. How is climate change connected to that?
Well, as the climate changes canes, it can create more favorable conditions for certain diseases to spread.
Oh, I see.
Plus, as people are forced to migrate, due to climate change impacts,
Yeah.
they can come into contact with new pathogens.
Right. So it's like a double whammy.
Yeah, it's a complex issue.
Yeah.
But it's clear that Bangladesh is preparing its future leaders to think about these connections.
That's good. I mean, it's a pretty sobering thought.
It is.
Yeah.
Bangladesh facing all these challenges because of climate change.
Right.
But here's what I find really interesting. They're not just sitting back and taking it.
So what are they doing?
The exam questions really highlight the focus on mitigation and adaptation strategies.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Well, mitigation is about reducing greenhouse gas emissions,
Okay.
which is, the root cause of climate change.
Right.
Adaptation is about adjusting to the effects that are already happening
Okay.
and preparing for the effects that are coming.
So it's like a two-pronged attack,
Exactly.
tackling the problem at its source, while also figuring out how to live with the changes that are already here.
Yeah, I noticed the exam questions mentioned the Delta Plan 2100 quite a bit.
The Delta Plan.
Yeah, the Delta Plan 2100.
I never heard of that.
Okay, well, it's basically a long-term strategy to create a climate-resilient Bangladesh.
Wow. So what does that involve?
It covers everything.
Everything.
From water management and flood control to agriculture and infrastructure and development.
That's massive.
It really is.
So it's not just one thing. It's a whole toolbox of strategies.
Exactly.
Wow.
And the exam questions go deep into the specifics.
Okay, like what?
Well, one question I saw asked students to analyze the feasibility of implementing a specific renewable energy project.
As part of the Delta Plan.
Yes, as part of the Delta Plan.
So they're not just learning about the plan in theory.
No.
They're being asked to think critically about how to put it into action.
Exactly.
That's great.
And that leads us to another important aspect.
Okay.
Climate funds.
Climate funds.
Yeah.
What are those?
Well, these funds receive contributions from both domestic and international sources
Okay.
to finance adaptation and mitigation projects.
So it's about putting money where their mouth is?
Exactly.
Actually funding these crucial projects.
Right.
Okay, but it's not as simple as just throwing money at the problem.
Right. One exam question I found
Yeah.
asked students to evaluate the effectiveness of a particular climate funding mechanism. And it really highlighted the challenges
Of what?
of ensuring transparency and accountability in how these funds are used.
So they're being trained to think critically about the whole process.
Yes.
From funding to implementation.
Mm-hmm.
That's impressive.
It's a really comprehensive approach.
It is.
And it's not just happening in isolation.
What do you mean?
Well, the exam questions also bring up the global context.
Right, because climate change is a global issue.
Exactly. And those exam questions about international agreements like the Kyoto Protocol
Yeah.
really drive that point home.
The Kyoto Protocol, that was the first international treaty, right?
Yes, that committed industrialized nations to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I remember that. A big step forward.
It was.
Yeah.
It had its limitations.
Of course, but it set the stage for future agreements and global cooperation.
Right. And Bangladesh, despite being a developing country with relatively low emissions,
Yeah.
has been very vocal in advocating for stronger global action.
So even though they aren't a major contributor to the problem, they're stepping up as leaders in finding solutions.
Exactly. And that brings us to the role of the IPCC,
The IPCC.
the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Oh, right.
You know what they do?
Refresh my memory.
They assess the science
Uh-huh.
related to climate change
Okay.
and provide policymakers with the latest information.
So they're like the scientific authority on climate change.
Yes.
Informing international negotiations and national policy.
Exactly. And Bangladesh uses the IPCC's findings
To do what?
to advocate for greater action from developed nations
Okay.
and to secure financial and technological support for vulnerable countries like themselves.
So they're using science and diplomacy to push for change on a global scale.
Exactly.
That's really smart.
But how does all of this, these international climate policies, actually affect you on a personal level?
That is a good question.
And it's one that some of the exam questions actually touch on.
Oh.
Yeah, because international climate policies can influence everything
Like what?
from the price of energy to the availability of certain goods and services.
Okay, can you give me a concrete example?
Sure. The shift towards renewable energy sources,
Okay.
which is driven by international agreements and national policies,
Right.
that's creating new jobs and investment opportunities.
In the clean energy sector.
Yes, and that could mean new career paths
Right.
for you or someone you know.
Interesting.
Similarly, efforts to promote sustainable agriculture and reduce deforestation can impact food prices.
Oh, okay.
and the choices you make at the grocery store.
So even if we don't always see it,
Yeah,
those global policies have a ripple effect on our everyday lives.
exactly.
Wow.
And it's important to remember that climate change is a global issue that demands collective action.
Yeah. No one country can solve this alone.
Right.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together.
Absolutely. We need to look beyond borders and understand that our actions have consequences.
Both locally and globally.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's where I think Bangladesh's experience offers some valuable lessons.
It really does.
We'll delve deeper into that in part 2 of our deep dive.
You won't want to miss it.
It's amazing. Bangladesh's vulnerability,
Yeah.
it's actually become a catalyst for action.
How so?
Well, the country has kind of emerged as a leader
Okay.
in climate adaptation,
Interesting.
developing these innovative solutions and sharing their knowledge with other vulnerable nations.
So they've turned their challenges into opportunities
Exactly.
for growth and leadership.
You see it reflected in the exam questions, too.
Really?
Yeah, challenging students to think critically
Okay.
and creatively about solutions.
It's not just memorizing facts.
No.
They're grappling with real-world problems
Mhm.
and proposing new ideas.
They're being trained to be problem solvers.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
One thing that struck me
Yeah.
was the emphasis on education
Okay.
and awareness raising.
Right. Yeah.
What stood out to you?
Well, I mean, for one, these exam questions themselves,
Yeah.
they demonstrate the importance Bangladesh places on education
Right.
by incorporating climate change into the curriculum.
Uh,
They're equipping future leaders with,
yeah.
the knowledge and critical thinking skills.
It's crucial.
Absolutely. It's not just about knowing the facts.
No.
It's about understanding these systems, analyzing data, and developing policies.
It's like planting seeds
Yeah.
for a more sustainable future.
Right. And it's not just about policymakers either.
Right. I noticed some exam questions mentioned the role of communities in climate action.
Yeah. Bangladesh has this strong tradition of community-based disaster preparedness.
Really?
Yeah. Local communities, they play a vital role
Okay.
in early warning systems, evacuation efforts,
Yeah.
post-disaster recovery.
So it's crucial for building resilience
Absolutely.
and making sure that climate action is tailored to those specific needs.
It's about empowering people at the grassroots level to be part of the solution.
And it's not just about preparing for disasters.
No, it's also about incorporating traditional knowledge and practices
Oh, interesting.
into their adaptation strategies.
Give me an example.
One exam question asked students to analyze how indigenous communities
Yep.
in the Sundarbans are using their understanding of the ecosystem to adapt to rising sea levels.
Wow, that's tapping into local expertise.
It is.
It seems like Bangladesh is taking this multifaceted approach,
Right.
combining these top-down policies
Yeah.
with bottom-up community engagement.
Exactly. And they're not shying away from the economic realities either.
Okay, what do you mean?
The exam questions, they also highlight the economic implications
Of climate change.
in Bangladesh.
Mm.
It's not just an environmental issue.
Right.
It's a development challenge.
So how are they addressing that?
They acknowledge that climate change poses a threat to Bangladesh's economic growth
Right.
and development.
Yeah.
The impacts rising sea levels, extreme weather events, health risks.
Yeah.
They can disrupt agricultural production, damage infrastructure, and lead to economic losses.
That can trap people in poverty
Exactly.
and exacerbate these inequalities.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, climate change impacts the economy,
Right.
which then makes it harder to adapt and mitigate.
But amidst all these challenges, there's hope.
Oh, good.
The exam questions mention some positive outcomes of climate action.
Okay, like what?
For instance, they ask students to evaluate the potential of renewable energy
Okay.
to create jobs and stimulate economic growth.
So investing in climate action
Yeah.
can have positive economic return.
Exactly, and they're looking at it from multiple angles.
Right.
One question focused on the role of microfinance.
Okay, remind me what microfinance is.
Microfinance is providing small loans to help people start businesses.
Okay.
It's a way to empower people,
Yeah.
especially women, to adapt to climate change and build resilient livelihoods.
So finding creative solutions that address both the environmental and economic challenges.
And this ties back to international cooperation.
Okay.
I noticed the Kyoto Protocol was a recurring theme.
What do you think that is?
Well, it highlights the significance of these international agreements in shaping national policies and actions.
Yeah.
Bangladesh, despite its limited historical responsibility for climate change, has been very vocal,
Okay.
advocating for stronger global action.
So they're pushing for global change.
Absolutely. And these exam questions highlight the role of organizations like the IPCC.
Right. Providing that scientific foundation
Yeah.
for these international negotiations.
It's about using science to inform policy
Yeah.
and build a global consensus on climate action.
But it's not just about data and agreements.
No, you're right. These exam questions don't shy away from the human side of climate change.
That can get lost sometimes.
It's important to remember that behind all the data and the policies are real people whose lives are being profoundly affected.
Yeah, so how are these human impacts being addressed in Bangladesh?
Well, the exam questions, they look at various aspects of social resilience,
Okay, like what?
including community-based adaptation, mental health support for climate-affected communities,
Okay.
and the role of traditional knowledge in coping with climate change.
So it's not just environmental and economic.
Right.
It's a deeply human issue.
With social, cultural, and psychological dimensions. Exactly. And it's about finding solutions that are not just technologically sound, but socially just and culturally sensitive.
That brings up environmental justice. I
Right.
saw that in some of the questions.
Climate change often exacerbates existing inequalities,
How so?
impacting the most vulnerable populations.
The ones who contribute the least.
Exactly.
Those who are the least responsible or hit the hardest.
Right. And the exam questions explore how Bangladesh is working to ensure climate action is fair
Okay.
and equitable, taking into account the needs of those most affected. They discuss things like inclusive decision-making,
Yeah.
equitable access to resources, and targeted support for marginalized communities,
So recognizing that climate change can worsen inequalities.
and actively working to prevent that.
And it's not just about addressing material needs.
Right. It's also about recognizing the psychological and emotional impacts.
Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, the exam questions touch on things like eco-anxiety
Okay.
and climate grief,
Yeah.
recognizing that climate change can be a source of stress and anxiety.
Right. Especially for young people
Exactly.
inheriting this planet.
Yeah, the exam questions explore ways to address these psychological impacts.
So mental health support, community resilience building.
Yeah, and fostering a sense of hope and agency.
It sounds like Bangladesh is taking a holistic approach.
They are addressing the environmental, economic, social, and psychological dimensions.
And they're not afraid to embrace technology either.
No, they're not. The exam questions highlight the role of technology
Right.
in both mitigation and adaptation.
So how is technology being used?
Well, for example, they're exploring renewable energy technologies.
Like solar and wind power.
Yes, to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels.
Makes sense.
And they're also using technology for early warning systems, precision agriculture, and climate-resilient infrastructure.
So technology can address the causes and adapt to the impacts.
Right. And speaking of tools,
Yeah.
the exam questions emphasize data collection
Okay.
and monitoring.
Why is data so crucial?
Data is essential for informing those policy decisions,
Okay.
tracking progress, and identifying areas where interventions are needed.
Right.
Bangladesh has made strides in developing its climate monitoring
Yeah.
and early warning systems.
But it's not just about collecting the data.
No, it's about making it accessible
Right.
and usable.
The exam questions talk about open data platforms.
Yeah, and data visualization tools,
So sharing information.
fostering collaboration and empowering stakeholders.
It's about democratizing access to knowledge.
And it's not just about technical data either.
Okay.
It's also about the power of communication and storytelling
To raise awareness.
and mobilize action on climate change.
So how's that playing out in Bangladesh?
The exam questions explore the role of art, culture, and media
Interesting.
in shaping perceptions and inspiring action.
Okay.
They highlight the importance of translating complex scientific information
Right.
to relatable narratives
Showcasing those inspiring examples of resilience.
and engaging audiences through different mediums.
So making climate change relatable.
Yes, and connecting with people emotionally.
The exam questions even touch on the spiritual and philosophical dimensions.
They do. They ask students to consider our interconnectedness with nature and our responsibility to care for the planet.
That's a big one.
It is, and it's encouraging to see them grappling with these ethical and philosophical issues.
It's about recognizing that climate change isn't just a scientific or technological problem.
No,
It's a moral imperative
that demands a shift in our values.
and behaviors,
Exactly. Climate change isn't an isolated issue.
right? It intersects with poverty, inequality, and conflict.
It's a complex web of interconnected issues.
So the exam questions challenge students to think about these connections.
and propose solutions that address these challenges.
In an integrated way.
Exactly. They emphasize systemic thinking and collaboration.
Breaking down silos.
And working together.
It's what makes Bangladesh's approach so inspiring.
They're not just focusing on one aspect.
Yeah.
They're taking a holistic approach.
Yeah, recognizing the interconnectedness of everything.
It's a reminder that even facing these challenges, there is hope.
That brings us to our final question.
Okay.
What can other nations learn
From Bangladesh.
in tackling climate change?
It's a powerful question.
We've seen how Bangladesh is facing these impacts head on.
Yeah, developing solutions, advocating for global action
What lessons can we learn?
as individuals.
And a global community.
We'll explore that in the final part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned. All right, welcome back, everyone, for part 3. So we've been looking at these university exam questions from Bangladesh,
Right.
really getting a sense of how they're preparing to deal with climate change.
Yeah, it's been pretty eye-opening.
And their approach is so comprehensive,
It really is. They're not leaving anything out.
from the science to the economics,
The social impacts, the
and
tech.
even the ethical parts.
Yeah, it's impressive.
And remember,
Yeah,
this is a country that's dealing with climate change right now.
right on the front lines.
So they're not just talking about solutions.
They're living it,
They're putting them into action.
which makes their experience so valuable for other countries.
It's like a living laboratory for climate action.
Exactly. They're trying things out, see what works.
So let's get to that final question.
Okay.
What can other nations learn from Bangladesh?
It's a big one, but we've got some good insights from these exam questions.
Okay, so what do you think is the most important takeaway?
Long-term planning.
Okay.
Bangladesh has this Delta Plan 2100. It's their long-term strategy for climate resilience.
And other nations can learn from that.
Absolutely. Climate change needs a sustained response.
Not just quick fixes.
Exactly. Thinking ahead, anticipating challenges.
Protecting future generations.
But it's not just about the top-down planning, though.
Right, we've seen how important community engagement is.
Bangladesh really gets that.
Local knowledge is key.
For effective climate action,
So another lesson,
empower communities
involve them in the decisions.
and use that local expertise.
Communities aren't just passive.
They need to be active agents of change.
We've also seen how Bangladesh is fostering international cooperation.
They're pushing for global action.
They understand it's a global challenge.
And they're leading the way.
So another lesson,
Be proactive.
Yeah.
Engage in diplomacy.
push for those collaborative solutions.
And don't be afraid to innovate.
Bangladesh is always trying new things,
New approaches, new technologies,
thinking outside the box.
adapting to the changes.
But one of the biggest lessons for me
What's that?
is the resilience of the people.
They're facing so much.
But they never give up.
Determination, ingenuity, and hope.
And that's something we can all learn from.
It really is.
No matter where you are, what you're facing,
Never lose hope.
keep striving, keep innovating, keep working
For
together.
a better future for everyone.
It's a great note to end on.
It is.
Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive
Into climate change in Bangladesh.
through these exam questions.
Fascinating stuff.
I don't know about you, but I feel like I've learned a lot.
Me too, seeing how they're preparing for the future.
It's given us a lot to think about.
How to be more proactive, more collaborative, more resilient
We all have a role to play.
in creating that sustainable future.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions.
And keep the conversation going.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.